good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time it is for you around the world. We'd like to welcome you here to another BMI Times Higher Education webinar. Got an absolutely fantastic, information-packed 45 minutes to an hour ahead of us. It's probably going to be an hour. That's how good it's going to be. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about ways that universities can work more closely with college counsellors at the time of admission processes, and there's some fantastic information that we're going to be sharing with you from our lovely presenters. And actually, why don't we start talking about how BMI Times Higher Education works with this lovely group of people. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to share with you a little bit of information about the CAP. Now, the Times Higher Education Counselor Accreditation Program is something which has been set up by counsellors for counsellors. This is a wonderful way of bringing to the community an accreditation program that reflects what counsellors and modern counsellors are actually doing these days when they're working in international schools around the world. So the CAP, the Counsellor Accreditation Program, is a series of 12 one-hour units that we run in association with Common Purpose, the famous training and delivery program people. And that those 12 units has been put together by the advisory board, and we've got 3 members of that advisory board with us today. Starting off with the lovely Marsha Ashima from the International School in Geneva in Switzerland. Thank you so much for being with us, Marsha. We've got Christina McDade, who's joining us for Lincoln Community School, all the way from Ghana, Akwabu. And then we have the marvelous David Turner from Dwight School in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about the subject. But before then, I just want to run through what BMI is doing. And so if you want to meet fantastic counsellors, such as the ones that we've got on the call today, feel free to come along to our regional workshops, which are running all across the world. And they're going to be taking place in Panama, in Southeast Asia, in Brazil, in the UAE, in Africa, in China. And there you can see in front of you is the big list of where we're going to be running those workshops. And I'm looking forward to seeing some of the people on this call at those workshops later in the year. So if you need any more information about that, there's going to be a slide up at the end that has all the contact details, and we will be putting in a link to our calendar as well. So thank you very much for that. But first, let's go to the main attention. The main attraction, our lovely people, our counsellors who are joining us here live. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon and this evening. And what we're going to do is we're going to launch straight into those questions. And we're going to be talking about university council relations. And I guess the idea that we're looking at this is, are there any changes for geographical area? We're going to be digging into all of these situations. But first of all, I'd like to start off with David Turner, if I may. David, what do you think have been the most effective ways for universities to reach counsellors?
You know, when I work with counselors, I think that, for example, you know, if a counselor or a university rep wants to connect with counselors, more often than not, they have at least 1, maybe 2 people who are boots on the ground. And so, you know, the most effective way is counselors are, by our nature, people who like to talk, people who are collaborative. So if Christine knew that someone was coming to the region, I think that she or Marsha or myself would certainly jump onto whatever regional WhatsApp groups that we have here and let people know that, hey, guess what? You know, Waterloo's in town, and they just delivered a great session at Dwight School Dubai. Or, you know, another thing to do is I know sometimes there's some movement in our communities. And so I think another really good way would be to try through LinkedIn. I know that a number of my colleagues will often reach out to LinkedIn and say, hey, Dave, listen, we're coming to your region. We're going to be there next week or next month. Have you got a space? Have you got time? if I'm candid with you, I don't think that emails are always the best bet. It's kind of a wider net approach, and so you might have some nibbles there. But man, just reach out to counselors. Counselors will support other counselors, and if I've got someone coming to town, I'll let other people know.
Thank you
If
so
I
much for
could,
that. That's absolutely fantastic. Marcia, please.
just to add, piggyback onto David, how to tap into some of these counselor networks. There are also groups, sometimes regional or country groups. Like, for example, I'm in Switzerland, and all of the counselors at international schools, we have a group we call Swiss Plus. So any university who reaches one of us and says, you know, who else in Switzerland should I contact? We have a one-page document with all of our contact information, and we agree to send it to, share it. There's also the professional groups like International ACAC or IC3, that if you're members of those groups and you go through the directory for certain regions, or those Facebook groups, you put up that blast as well, and you'll undoubtedly hear from lots of counselors.
That is fantastic. Now, Christina, we were talking recently about the number of visits that some schools in popular areas get from universities. And I know that there was one school that I visited in Vietnam that had over 300 universities who visited them during a year. So, Christina, we're always looking at what the students want from the universities, but the counsellors themselves, when they're dealing with the universities, what are the counsellors looking for when dealing with universities, Christina?
I think it's good for universities to know how much legwork we put into our student bodies, to know what our needs are for our communities, whether it ranges from financial need or particular majors or programming that they might not be as exposed to. And so we do kind of chronicle that and keep that in our hearts whenever we're networking with you above ground, to get you to come visit our kids in our programming situations. I think, first of all, just the willingness to participate in conversation with us is very open and key. Reaching out through messaging or through our respective local groups and regional and international groupings. I've been blessed to be in the same groupings with both David and Marcia. And so through those networks and contacts, we talk about you all in the most positive way as we can. And knowing that, like, oh, this school is starting to increase their look at certain regions of the world is super helpful. I think the other part that we look for in universities is how they communicate with our students. If they know, or if it's not a spam note, but a note that seems to be thoughtful in response to a student or a need, that is important. I think the biggest turnoff for my students, especially now that I'm based in Ghana, is getting that follow-up email asking for an English proficiency exam when Ghana's national language is English. And so that is a turnoff to a student, because that means that I'm just a number. I'm just another case to you and your system. And so therefore, I don't want to communicate with you. And to be honest, I log that in myself when I'm communicating with universities as well. If it's a turnoff to my kids, it's going to be kind of a turnoff for me too. How you communicate with our students is quite important. I think that also the willingness for universities to look for other ways to recruit besides just traditional means is super important as well. One of the things that I think a lot of counselors who have started to use the reverse admissions platforms like Concourse or Mato have been really using those resources as well to look at specialty programs that have been coming up, or alternative avenues to work with students on acceptances and making the pathway easier, or willing to have, again, that conversation and that personable look at a student.
Fantastic. I know that many universities are visiting, but also there's opportunities for virtual collaboration. So David, I'd like to have you think about this if possible. In your experience, how effective are virtual collaborations with universities, webinars, workshops? And do you have any tips about how universities might run these events?
Yeah, virtual stuff for me is a real boon. So I'm lucky in that I'm actually in classrooms 9, 10, 11, and 12. And so I have weekly sessions built into the curriculum where I'm actually in with students. So I love to use that time putting virtual sessions together with colleagues. I was on a call with UAL last week. As I said today, I had a visit from Waterloo and talking to my colleagues there to say, hey, listen, what's got you excited, brother? What's got you excited about the university? And so using the energy that we create and finding speaking points, I really appreciate what Christina said. Do your homework, folks. You know, it's important that when our colleagues collaborate with us, there is that common language, and it's something that many people might forget, that regional differences are incredible. Having that ground or foundation laid, you know, using virtual sessions for me, as I said, is a boon, because I can bring students to the front door of those conversations with our university counselors and colleagues. And to me, that's important. I cannot not bring the level of specificity that our colleagues can. You know, how do I talk to a young person, you know, about a business school, or, you know, computer programming or computer engineering to the nth degree like my colleagues can? So I find virtual sessions absolutely phenomenal. And I use them across the grade range to start getting kids to think about future career and study pathways. What a great way to onboard that over a timeline, contiguously through those grades. So I use them quite a lot, and I will continue to use them. And I think that for both our counselors as well as our colleagues in admissions, you know, talk to counselors. We are time poor, not unlike you are, but I think it's really easy these days to find those common collaborative topics that can support growth in anybody's community.
Absolutely. And here we are having a virtual webinar. You know, it does happen, it does work, and information does get sent out. So does anybody else want to contribute on virtual stuff? Christina?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity. So between 2020 and 2022, I changed locations. So we're in one space where the infrastructure was fantastic and very easy to navigate. I'm now in a situation where the infrastructure, although albeit strong, is not consistent. And so that's where virtual visits are hard to come by, especially in the region where I am. I'm located in Ghana right now. One of the things that I have been encouraging and using students to do is going onto the university website, of course, and trying to book a time with that regional representative and stuff. And sometimes the timing is still one that is based more so for either Asia or for India or another location, which is a little late for my kids, and I'm GMT, I'm right in the middle. So I always think it'd be more flexible to do that. But I think the virtual visits that have been more impactful is that if it's linked by a grouping or within a specific region. So instead of looping students from West Africa onto the UAE visit or the Central European visit, if you group a time within that time zone of within the West Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, you'll have a lot more visits or a lot more participation. One group who does that pretty well, and they do it every year, CIS, they central it just around Africa, and that timing is sent out, is promoted against the counselors, and then people feel comfortable getting on board with their kids during timings that work for their populations. So I think those are key, but I'm also getting my group more used to doing virtual visits because they didn't do them at all during the pandemic. So that's something also to note.
Well, Christina, be rest assured, we will be coming to see you. BMI Times Higher Education is coming to Ghana later this year, and also to Kenya and to Nigeria as well. I can't wait to be in your backyard. So thank you very much. Now, Marsha, you were thinking about the comment on the virtual stuff.
Throw in one more thing on this topic, and it kind of goes back to the first question to David about, and his response that, you know, talk to counselors, and there are regional differences, you know, even in the virtual space, you know, try to, as best you can, and it may depend school to school, but reach out and see what it is, because at my school, at least in Western Europe, virtual visits aren't very popular. We even with big name schools that we think, oh, of course they're all going to show up online tonight because it's, you know, university, blah, blah, blah. Our students are, I don't know, fatigued or feel that they have other ways to access, you know, so we also are I'm very sensitive of not impinging on university reps' time. So I think there is, you know, a little bit to also get to know the regions. And again, goes back to that networking we were talking about, to see what the need is.
Absolutely.
In a particular region.
Now, Marsha, I mean, we're talking to you in Switzerland. It has 4 official languages: French, German, Italian, and Romansh, as we were discussing the other day. The question which I have is about counselors who are busy juggling and supporting students who are applying to multiple universities in multiple countries. And as somebody who's sitting in Geneva with 4 languages, your students are going to be applying all over the world to multiple places. So how can universities support counselors who are going through that process, applying to all of these? And this is a question for anybody, but I'm mentioning it to Marsha.
Oh, if we could figure that out, we'd all be very wealthy. It is a reality at my school, my international school in Switzerland, that our students often apply to multiple countries. It is the benefit of privilege in part, and also just the choice, because we expose them to all of these choices that they never knew they had. And so what the universities can do is a good question, because the universities, of course, you all are trying to promote your individual universities to the best you can, and the better job you do, the more students are interested. So we kind of increase the challenge the more you reach out. But I think definitely, you know, information to counselors that would be helpful to us to advise students, you know, what is unique about, or what do you think is distinctive about universities in the Czech Republic? You know, especially if you're a university from a region or a country that, you know, for example, students from Switzerland don't necessarily apply to in high numbers, and you'd like to change that. So it is educating us, because the reality of multiple country choices is also, in some of those popular countries, it is getting increasingly competitive. So it's in our interest as counselors to best support our students. The more we can learn about other destinations and the benefits of those destinations, the better we can help students make choices when they have lots of choices, and also open them up to new ideas, because, you know, students are human, and you listen to what your friends and your classmates are doing. So, oh, you're applying to IE, then all of a sudden we're like, whoa, why is half the grade applying to, you know, this particular university? It's, you know, the kids must be talking. So I guess on the university side, we can't tell you, oh, don't do such a great job with your marketing, because we've got too much interest. But the more you can help us and students understand the benefits of your region, your type of university.
Yeah, there's some horse trading that has to happen here. I absolutely love what Marsha said, and she's right. You know your students. I can tell you effectively with majority of my students where, you know, I like certain buckets. Like, you know, we'll have a business and marketing bucket. We'll have a STEMI bucket. And so when I'm talking to reps, and to your point also, Marsha, you're right. You know, we're pretty blessed in Dubai to have students apply to a plethora of places. And it can be daunting sometimes, but the conversation is always best fit, right? Despite the fact that we have the luxury of looking at many different destinations, the conversation will always circle back to best fit. And so when you're talking to counselors, and when counselors are talking to our admissions colleagues, I mean, we're both advocates, right? I'm going to advocate on behalf of Dwight's school because I really believe in the institution and the community I serve, just like you're going to do the same for your community. So therein lies an opportunity always. If I can sit and talk to some of my colleagues, I'll say, hey, listen, you know what? Tell me your top 5 programs. You know, we're going to go through a pretty regimented script, and it's something that as our colleagues become more familiar with regions, you know, they can start to discern, like, okay, in certain parts of the world, the conversations are going to gravitate more naturally toward what kind of funding or what kind of financial aid can a student expect. And that would probably be fairly ubiquitous. Whereas in other places, you know, and other counselors might need these kinds of things. Talk to us. I hold the keys to my kingdom, and I'm happy to share them with anybody who's willing to sit down and have a conversation. So get to know more about the communities you're coming to see. Get to know more about the individual schools. That's really important. And again, the advocacy that we have is a collaborative opportunity shared.
I think using the CAP too, we're coming from so many different great places, and like David says, use these communities to reach out to us. We're LinkedIn away, or a message or Facebook away from reaching out to learn more about our communities. I think the other part too, and I think it's been a blessing and a curse from what I've noticed in this application season, and that is that more and more schools are starting to align themselves against the US calendar a little bit. And so like this year was the first year, well, maybe last year, that like schools in Canada and a couple of schools in Europe were aligning themselves more with the December 15th earlier deadlines for early admission to help with the visa process for students. And so I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse. It works for me because I have an internal deadline at my school before winter break, but having clarity maybe at the beginning of the school year, beginning of your application season, just giving us like clear dates that you're working with helps us organize our students a bit better too. Sometimes we're searching just as the kids trying to find out, so when is the date for the school? I remember 2 years ago it was in February, now it's in December, like what's going on? So when you're sending us that welcome email at the start of the school year, or the start of the application, being very clear within your messaging to us saying, these are our dates this year. This is when we want this due. This is when we want either IB predicted or midterm due. That helps us organize ourselves and our students a bit better as well.
Fantastic. I'd like to talk about the student application process here. And coming from BMI, Times Higher Education, publishers of the World University Rankings, I realize that our rankings might occasionally create issues for counselors who are dealing with students that come in, and parents that come in and go, this is highly ranked. I want my kid to go to MIT, nowhere else. Yeah, that sort of interesting conversation to manage, right? So David, I'll start with you. How can counselors talk about rankings? And there are many out there, but of course we're talking about the Times Higher Education World University Rankings and instance. But how do you got the plug in? How do you guys talk about rankings?
It's a lens, and it's a consumer lens. You know, just like you would look for anything of value, do your homework. You know, kick down the doors of research, sharpen your pencil, go out there and find the answers. If I'm candid with you, I always tell my students that rankings they serve a purpose, but rankings are also important because it's not just the top position universities. I love to use certain websites like EduRank, where I'll tell students, okay, this is a purely consumer process. I want you to look at North America. Look at all the highly ranked schools. Any surprises? Nope, didn't think so. Look at the UK. Look at all any surprises? Nope, didn't think so. But now let's look at that same opportunity and let's put engineering in there. And what you'll see is the top tier universities that you would expect to see don't always have as highly positioned program that you might be looking at. And if I'm candid with you, I'm not as numbers driven in that regard. But what I do want to tell parents and students is look for the names that keep coming up, because you'll see names that keep coming up in the top 20 for business. And then business has a subset of different particular programs within that college of business. So using those metrics, keep shuffling the deck. We can look again at the bigger slices, and those are regions. But then we can look at the subsets where we're looking at a more filtered, specific category. Again, whether it's economics or whether it's business or engineering or whatever it is. But take all of this not as an end product, but as a means to start your research process. All too often, again, if it's just purely that lens, and if that's the only tool in your tool belt, well, then you need to go back and talk to counselors and other people to provide additional means of research for you. It's a lens, it works, but it shouldn't be the only lens.
That's fantastic. And we've got a live question in from Alina Savitskaya. What is your advice for lesser known smaller universities? Sometimes our requests to meet counselors or students get ignored. So what's the best approach to counselors to sit down for a cup of tea at least? And I've got my cup of tea here. Marcia, could you cover that for us?
Sure. I guess some of it is, how do you reach schools and how do you find out, right? Because we were all talking about that. I think, it's sometimes a process, as David said, sometimes email, you can provide a lot of information, but is it going to be read? Sometimes it's, to be honest, persistence, and not that you should email somebody every day and start cold calling them every week, but it's different ways to network, or thinking about the time in a particular school calendar. The week before a UCAS deadline at a school that's heavy UK is not the time to approach that counselor, because they're going to be a little snappy with you, and they're going to ignore almost anything that doesn't have to do with that. So it's also being conscious of other kinds of deadlines in either a school calendar or in other admission systems. Some of it is, the investment of time. There are some, that you say, okay, I'm going to try for a few visits, and it might take a few years to kind of build the networks and the relationships. And as David said, you just need that one person who spends that time with you and then tells the rest of their buddies or regional group, hey, did you know about this school? And then you have everyone saying, ooh, I've been ignoring that email. So you just got to get through to that one person sometimes, or that one event, or, invest in going to that one conference where you can have those conversations with people at a time when they're able to focus on the conversation. And sometimes that is, again, an investment of time, because sometimes I do try to meet, especially with institutions I don't know much about, and then, almost sometimes feel apologetic, like, oh, I'm sorry, I did advertise a student, session, but, sorry about that. And I do appreciate when the rep says, but I understand, I'm trying to build a relationship with your school. So I'm happy to talk to you today, and then maybe next year.
Okay.
It'll be different.
Christina.
Yeah, again, patience is definitely one of those big themes, connecting within the network. I think I'm always happy when I have a talk to a new school, because there's a new opportunity to learn. I've also utilized, and I think for smaller schools who may have a bit of a budget to try to do one-shot deals or what have you, I think the BMI Global forums are really awesome to use. There's a lot of great small schools that I've encountered from that speed dating platform that's set up with that BMI does over those 2 days, where they're ranked, like not ranked, but they're put under like countries or whatever, and like you want to identify some countries that you know that has come up in conversation with your kids, and so you start talking to smaller schools to see what they have on offer. And I know for me and my students, for some of them, the scholarship aspect is important, and some of the smaller schools may actually have more budget to help fund an education as opposed to the bigger schools who have lots of money in their coffers but not necessarily share. The smaller, if you're a smaller school and you're trying to branch into other regions of the world, I found the BMI Global Fairs to be useful in also promoting my school, but also getting your name out there as well.
Thank you, Christina. We got to talk about AI at some stage, right? The elephant in the imaginary room. David, what's the impact on AI on essay writing and university politics around it?
Man, that's a slippery slope. Where's Jeff?
Yeah, where's Jeff Neal?
That's a tough one. Even before AI, if I'm candid with you, we know our students. We've been working with them for years, and so it's always a bit dubious to me when suddenly you have a very polished application essay in front of you, and it's a bit of a head scratching moment. And I've often told kids, well, you make sure that your team of writers understand that was a pretty well written application. I can't stop a kid from using AI. I can't stop a kid from getting help outside to do the same. You could ask a different group of people consistently what their thoughts are on something like this. It's really a natural connecting point, because if I'm candid with you, I would rather have a student I'm being recorded. I would rather have a student use something like AI. I'm not an advocate of it, than going out and paying somebody who might not know that child as well to help write, because that can be a considerable cost point that some might not be able to shoulder. And so I look at it as a more of an equalizing opportunity for a young person. And I have had kids come and tell me, sir, listen, I used a little bit of AI on this. And I'm like, yeah, brother, that's pretty obvious. But that at least gives us a starting point of where we can start to refocus it. And so I can still work with a kid who's using AI as part of her application or his application process. And for that, I'm grateful. And again, I'm not trying to throw any of our IEC colleagues under the bus on that, but at least I know that I can continue working with one of my kids by using AI.
Fantastic. Marsha, a question for you. And we're looking at sort of the alignment between marketing, recruitment, and admission. So what are the nitty-gritty elements of the application process are most difficult for counsellors and students? And how can universities ease that pain? It's a $1 million question there.
Yeah, it depends, right? There's always that challenge of, no matter how much information you give some people, and I'm not just talking students, I'm talking the grown-ups involved, and they're not reading it, or they're not, so I was thinking about this question in advance. I think most students and the people helping them grasp the big steps, right? Like, even with a kind of more loose system like the US, where every university can basically do what they want, the basics. I got to fill out a form, I might have to write an essay, I got to send some things. So the basics tend to be, it's the specific details that some universities like to throw in, and how those specifics are presented. Quite honestly, I think some of us, the counselors, even we have sometimes trouble finding some of those things. Like if it's something really that you know as a university is, this is specific to us. We want this kind of form. We want this, a writing sample done like this. We want arts applicants to apply 2 weeks early, not by the deadline. You know, try to make that obvious, because to be honest, sometimes it's buried in the detail and the counselors aren't even looking, because we're not deep reading every single website. We're hoping the students are reading deeply for what they're doing, and they're not always. So, you know, there's that. But again, it's the challenge of how much information you can present, because if you put exhaustive detail, then people are overwhelmed. But it is, you know, trying to at least highlight what you, the university, does acknowledge may be out of the norm for your system. I think that, and then kind of an extension of that, it's not so much the nitty-gritty of the element, but it's how information is presented. And this is more, maybe more to universities that have very specific requirements, either testing scores or points saying, you know, this is the minimum for you to even be in the running, to as much as possible. And again, this is where marketing and reality, we understand that delicate balance is when what the university is advertising or promoting as kind of the expectation, the requirement, but really that requirement expectation where you're selecting is vastly different.
Right, right.
So that's not a nitty-gritty, but
Gotcha.
that is a piece of information that is really hard for counselors to manage, because we may
Gotcha.
know from experience, but you have a hard sell with a parent or a student when they're pointing at the university website saying, no, 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 this
Yeah,
is my fit because I'm showing you what the university is telling me. So
absolutely, yeah.
how you present details, and then also I guess the accuracy of
Gotcha.
those
Hey, Marsha,
details.
I'm gonna jump in here a wee bit too. I love when universities are clear. We all do. I recently was in a ninth grade session where I'm teaching kids how to research. You know, it's one thing to tell a kid, kick down the doors of research, which I love saying, but then it's another thing to show her how to do it.
Aren't they just using Google though? I mean, isn't it easy?
Oh, bloody hell. Yeah, there's opinions are like elbows. You know, pretty much everyone's got one. And so when you're starting to look at trying to disseminate, you know, what would be good information versus just noise out there, there's a lot of that. I always tell kids, go with the websites. And I would to my colleagues, I would offer, look at Manchester. I just throw a name out there, but I really start with Manchester, because I think that, you know, we can look at, okay, let's look at the university. Let's look at the first page of the university. Let's look at that, because that's usually how we capture and interpret community. There's lots of different things going on. Look, hey, there's a little blurb there telling you their current stance on Palestine. Look, there's another blurb talking about diversity. These are the kinds of things that kids need to look at in order to not just look at a degree program or requirements, but to get a feel for the university. Tearing it down an additional layer, if we are going to have the conversation about what requirements are, again, I really appreciate how that particular university rolls their stuff out. You can look right at their undergraduate programs, and you have a whole listing alphabetically, A through Z, of each degree program. And if I got a grade 9 student who's not really sure what she wants to do, at least she can start informing that critical internal dialogue. She can look at, oh my gosh, aerospace engineering has a 3-year and a 4-year program. Well, that's a bachelor's degree, that's a master's degree. Why is that important? Well, because if you're looking at it from an economic viewpoint, first of all, you're looking at a 3-year program versus a 4-year program in the United States. That's a cost point internal analysis. In addition, if you're looking to do a master's degree in the US, that's 6 years. 6 fingers, there we go, 6 years. Whereas this one's 4 years. That's another cost point, internal discussion. Let's look at each one of those. We can click on the first one, which is an undergraduate degree. We can go right to there, and it's going to give you a synopsis of the degree program itself. You can read that. You can feel whether or not that connects with you. You can keep scrolling down and look at, there it is, requirements. Well, for the IB, you need to have a minimum of a 36. In fact, you have to have a 766 because I'm an IB school. And it's all there. Oh, and guess what? You need to have a math at an AA level, at an SL or above. Okay, great. All of that's there. Then you can go even more granular to look at each year, each of those 3 years, and look at each individual class that supports that degree program. So it's cuckoo bananas clear to a counselor and to a student and to a parent who's looking at it. I totally agree with Marcia. I think to have that kind of access for a student and a parent is really important. Not only that, we counselors can reach out. We've got these wonderful collaborative groups. So if I needed something, my God, if Christina didn't know or Marcia didn't know, I've got hundreds of other people who I can put it out into these groups to get those kinds of answers. But there's really, really, really shouldn't be any other place that a student should go than other to a school's website. And so to our colleagues out there, make sure that your website is accessible. Make sure, because kids are little attention demons, put some videos in there to keep them occupied. Make sure that they're getting a balance between what would be like a university culture as well as an academic capture. So there's
I guess all of this will be picked up by AI as well if they're doing their research, because the AI is going to be going to the university website to look for that information. So I've got a question for Christina here. I mean, we're looking at how universities choose to admit one student over another. Christina, how does a student stand out during their admission process?
From what I've been told by other university people, clarity in application. Just as much as we ask for universities to be very clear on their website, what they want and what they're seeking in students, they're asking the students to present the same, right? And so we even with the US system, we try to encourage them to be clear about who you are and what you represent and the things that you are passionate about. And you don't have to go too furry. I know sometimes people think that you have to go really I sat on a mountaintop and saw my future before me. And as the snow came down, you don't need all of that. If that's not your bag, we encourage students to be as natural about who they are, and instead of trying to think what they're selling to the university. In turn, I think that helps them be very clear about how they stand out within within application series and cycles. Looking at a variety of schools when students, especially when, and I think Marcia and David can both attest to this, when we have students apply to the same school, we kind of know in our gut by the clarity of that student's application if that university is going to, which university that going to choose that student over another. And again, we try to encourage our students to be clear about who they are. And I think that's important for universities to bring out. And I know in the fall, everyone has numbers, and even in the spring, but if your willingness as a university to say, instead of a traditional visit, can I do a visit based around a workshop or like a application read or something like that, that gives students that kind of insight. And that really does help students to kind of also discover if this school is one I'm going to follow through on to apply to. A lot of times I also have the students look at the essay questions ahead of time. And do you have any thoughts on these essay questions? Start writing to see what happens. And sometimes they get into an essay question and why do they want to know why 3 + 3 does not equal 6, in my opinion of it? So they'll make that clarity pretty much known. What has been nice to see too is within more in the European applications now and within the UCAS, there's room for students to also show a bit of personality, which has also been quite important, which I think also helps with them standing out in the process.
Yeah, absolutely excellent then. And we spoke about Manchester having a great way to start and having a look at their website. But are there any universities out there in the world that stand out for the ease of their application process? There might not be. We could be in that situation, folks, where it's all quite tricky. But is there anybody out there that just makes it easy?
I think on the art side, one that comes to mind on the US side has been SCAD. because they kind of, once a student just submits some information, there's someone there to walk that student through the process. And sometimes there's some hand holding that has to happen, and I don't have to worry about that part. But I've had students make those applications, and there's been a person that that communicates with them throughout the process. I think a lot of universities overall have just been realizing the social emotional cues that students are going through now more than ever. And so any school that takes that moment to reach out and say, you know, we saw that you started an application. Do you want to get on a call, talk about it, has been super helpful for some of my students as well. And that's been really great to see. There's so many that has been really stepping up to the plate regarding that, because I feel like kids today are suffering a lot from fear of being successful and following through. And so when I've had a student hesitate on an application and then they say, oh, they emailed me because they saw that I started, should I finish? I was like, what do you think? It says that you should reach out to them, reach out to them. That's a way that you all have been using smarter platforms to connect with students, which I definitely appreciate. And that's been across the world. I've been seeing more of that.
And talking about those platforms, I mean, there are certain things about UCAS, Common App, or other applications that work really well, Marsha. I mean, these common apps, are there any countries for which application process is more difficult than others? You know, can universities work to make these apps better?
Well, please don't put me on the spot to name the most difficult apps.
If you could name 5 of them, please, Marsha.
Yes. I think what is becoming increasingly, and again, we're going back to multiple, you know, students trying multiple systems, multiple countries, is that level of, that is a big nitty-gritty, like what is correct documentation? You know, COVID changed a lot in a lot of countries in terms of that student self-reporting, unofficial documents, you know, even counselors have a hard time. You're like, oh, is that one where if I don't put a stamp on that transcript, they're going to bounce it back, or can, you know, so again, it's going back to as much as a university can do to make that information clear to students and counselors, you know, and something about that I've noticed more universities doing, again, kind of post-COVID, is being more flexible about some of the particularly documentation. You know, it used to be a much harsher landscape in a lot of places about, no, it has to come this way, it has to be official, it has, you know, so even as simple as universities being more flexible at the time of application, that, okay, as long as your name appears in this screenshot of your score at time of application, we'll accept that. And maybe at some point in future, you're going to have to provide the actual official document. So even adjustments like that just takes the strain off of students and counselors, because I'm sure we've all been there, that it's like 10 o'clock the day before a deadline that happens to be on a Saturday, and you just open your email because you're crazy and have nothing better to do on a Friday night, and there's that student saying, hi, I know it's late, but I need a stamp signed, you know, transcript to upload by tonight at midnight, or else and can you, you know, go break in the school and do this for me? You know, so even that little flexibility, and we're not trying to make life harder for universities, but at the time of application, does it really, you know, what is your must-have to feel secure in the information being provided? Be as tough as you want if they're enrolling, because then they're focused on you. There's that. I mean, that's a big thing for me. You know, anything you can do to make financial paperwork and reporting clearer and more user-friendly for students and especially their parents. I think another thing that goes back to my last thought, to when we were talking about nitty-gritty, is keeping in mind that, especially when we're talking international schools, you're dealing with a student population that, that multilingual, even though English might be their primary academic language, it may, they're not necessarily native speakers. So going back to, I think Christina saying, clarity of language and clarity of instruction is really important, because sometimes I look at a website with a kid and they're like, what do you think this instruction means? And I'm like, gosh, I don't know either. We're just going to have to take our best guess, but then you don't want to be wrong, because then of course it's the counselor's fault because we didn't know. So again, that clarity of language and instruction.
Gotcha.
I want to jump in just really
Please,
quickly on
Christina.
something that Marcia shared, and especially upon a submission deadline stuff. It would be so lovely if universities, in that automatic message, along with what's missing in their application portal, as soon as they click submit, if there's a line in there that says your school official has this many days to submit this information. Because like from the parent and from the student, every day since once they submit is like, it's a lot. And that red X on that list of things that they're missing will haunt them until like they know for sure it's there. And we can tell them and we can share with them, for the most part, we have a little bit of a grace because we're a school to get that information into you. If in that like spam email, when you get their stuff and it says, so your school official has like 10 business days to submit this paperwork, that'll be such a great win for all of us. Gotcha. Because then I won't be harassing you about why isn't this X not cleared, because I sent this stuff like the same day or what have you. So just a small little thing.
Well, let's put David on the spot again. We was like making him uncomfortable. So, David, post-decision support. So, what happens when students don't get admitted to their top choice universities? For a university, you might be their second, third, fourth, fifth choice. How can universities help counselors who are now trying to get those students excited about going to a university that wasn't on their top of the list?
Well, first of all, I think you're dealing with three people here who have never had that experience, because we're all so darn good that we get our kids into their top choices every time. Marcia, am I right? Christina, right? There you go.
It becomes their top choice because they got accepted.
This is why we're on the board. This is why we're on the THE advisory board. Brilliant.
Like somebody wants you. Be happy about that.
Which says we don't have a sense of humor. If I'm candid with you, that's one of the best reasons I really like the fact that I get to work with younger kids, because if I and forgive me, because this is the truth. I mean, if I'm looking to work with a kid starting point grade 11, there's a lot of things that I have to unwork from their minds. Like, well, why are you choosing these? And have you looked at the requirements? Because if you start the conversation about academics and aspirations soon enough, you could really fine tune the best fit to create that greater alignment. And so, it happens, but there are ways to kind of like keep it at a distance. And again, starting in conversations earlier and making sure that students are not just saying, I want to go to London School of Economics and study economics. And well, why? And getting them to really do the research that's required. And the other part, once we've got the research, then we have to start vetting decisions. You can do the research, and that will answer a lot of questions. But the next process, when we start the vetting process, is when we start to ask, well, does this work for me? And so when you start that conversation and you've got 2 years of that, the outcomes tend to be better. Now, to answer your question directly, we do have plan B, plan C, plan D, plan F, plan G. We've got backup plans. And so I was gobsmacked today, and I'm being completely honest. Listen to this one, Christina and Marcia. I had a kid who applied with a predicted score that was 5 points below what the requirement was and got accepted. And I could not believe that a Russell Group school would make such a choice. Not that my kid's a horrible kid, that kid's terrific, but there is, I don't want to make the process sound arbitrary. There's some softer spots to it. But when it comes down to it, if you've done your homework, you've done the vetting, you've done the research, you've made sure that academics and aspirations are in a greater alignment, you've done pretty much all you can. The other thing is to be honest with your students. I physically told that child, Chica, you're 4 points, 5 points away from the minimum requirement. I wouldn't apply. She said, I'm going to give it a shot. And God bless her, she got it. And I was floored by that. So the process in of itself can be sometimes very daunting, and in my case today, very shocking. And so how do you find the middle ground to have a heart-to-heart with a kid and try to prepare them for what could be a better or a worse scenario? But that's a tough one. All I can say from my experiences is I try to do the best I can beforehand to lead up to that conversation. Afterwards, it's just sitting down with a kid and saying, okay, let's really focus on either option B or option C. And if that works out, most kids, when they go to university, and ladies, help me here, most kids, when they go to university, even though it might not be their first choice, once they're there, once they've met people and have friends and so forth, the transition option or the transition angle, in my opinion, in my experience, hasn't really taken foot. It doesn't have a strong footing. Most of them are more than willing to stay.
If I could jump
Please.
in and just extend what David said, I know all of us, the three of us, really believe in like student-centered. So we keep talking, the student needs to hear from you about this. Sometimes, right, when it comes down to these final decisions and these are the reality choices you have, the parents, I'm sure all of us have been in a situation where, you've got the student, they've got their choices. Maybe they can get that dream school or the one that they said was their top choice. And you realize pretty quickly, usually, because you get an angry phone call from some parent, that the student is actually fine with the choices they have, but mom or dad isn't. And so going back to the original question, what can a university do is also, and I know most of you university folks here do attend to parents, you do engage parents, but it is thinking about anticipating what do you think a parent. Now, none of us can solve the problem of parents who are snobs, educational snobs. That's not going to change, but helping provide information, whether it be to the student or making it available to the parents, to explain what a great choice your institution is. Because maybe the student actually knows that, actually believes it, but they have to convince their parents that that's it. So the more to help that student make the case, or even help the counselor, if the counselor gets pulled into that family debate, is what kind of information, and like I think Christina has said, making that student feel wanted. And there's a fine line between expressing like a personalized kind of, we are so happy that you have been accepted, and kind of being a little too heavy. We're not telling you to call those students every day, because
Right.
then they get a bit creeped out that they're being stalked. But there's a line between a little gesture that makes a student and their family feel very welcomed.
Absolutely, yeah. Christina, is that something you found?
Yeah, I found like, especially for those students who've gotten into really like programs that we like probably champion and love, like and they get in. What has been helpful in that convincing conversation is that that parent gets in, the university contacts the parent. Like they actually went back onto the application and saw that parent email address or that phone number submitted and reach out and calls that parent or sends a personal email to that parent and invite them to a conversation. What works even more, and from what I've seen, what's been some convincing factors for some students who, instead of going to the big known university within their community and going to a smaller one that was probably a better fit, was connecting that parent and that family with an alum or a student within that culture or have a shared cultural history or what have you, to have that conversation further. One example, and I'm not going to go into detail, but like the parent was so concerned about the student standing out in this small community that's predominantly white, and culturally, will they have a connection when they're there so they can have a place to go get their hair done or go someplace to get their groceries and stuff like that. And that university, when that student was accepted and ascended some scholarship running as well, that university reached out to the parent and then connected that parent with another parent. And then they had that conversation. And now that kid is in their third year at that university, quite happy, parent is happy. And like it became the perfect choice. And so if anything, I would always encourage universities, if you have the manpower or the ability to, then back into the beginning of that application, reach out to the parent directly and tell the parent, thank you for allowing your kid to apply to our university. How can we help support you in your decision-making process? We would love to have a phone call with you or Zoom, whatever you're comfortable with. Using WhatsApp and Telegram is also quite key if the parent gives that information as well.
I mean, that's absolutely fantastic. We're hearing about some really good evidence of best practice there. And, you know, university reps, we're talking about how they can assist counselors more, but really there are some magnificent individuals out there. I'm proud to have them as clients, and many have turned into friends over the years, just the way they've demonstrated their commitment to not only to the school, but to the parents, but to the pupil, and that commitment stays with them. Folks, we've had an extraordinarily large amount of questions that have come in today. And unfortunately, we're not going to have the time to answer them all. But I would strongly suggest, if you're a counselor, if you're a university, have a look at some of the questions here. There's some great ideas about platforms that have been launched by German institutions for counselors to make it easy to apply. But I think what we need to do, Marsha and David and Christina, is get together again, because there's so much more we can discuss. This, I know we haven't even got through our own questions, let alone many of the ones which have come in. So I'm going to thank you for your time, and I'd like to finish off by somebody that was watching this webinar, but it's Anita Bardwaj. And she says, I have to hop off, but wanted to thank you for all being so generous with your time and sharing such valuable insights. It's a nice reminder of the collective, meaningful work we all do to support these beautiful humans. And I think that's the great spirit. So thank you, Christina. Thank you so much, Marsha. Thank you, David. This has been recorded. Recordings are going to be sent out. We'll be circulating those questions around. And there'll be another webinar next month where we're going to be looking at subjects almost similar to this. So thank you for your time, presenters. I really appreciate it. A very, very full webinar, hundreds and hundreds of viewers all over the world. So your influence is huge here. And if anybody is interested in meeting lovely people like we have in front of us, then feel free to come along to any BM events, and there's going to be a link in there that you can click on to find out more information. But from me, from Christina, from Marsha, and from David, thank you very much, and we'll see you out there. Bye-bye.